Yeah, I'll just give a brief introduction. Hello everyone. On account of Global Encryption Day, which is happening on 21st October, this Saturday, we at ISOC, Internet Society Bengaluru chapter, have arranged a series of webinars on encryption, and today is the third one. On 21st, there is going to be in-person events at Ramaya University, Bengaluru. There's going to be student competition, workshop on encryption, and one more webinar on that day. Brief on what ISOC is all about. Broadly, there are three goals for ISOC. First one is to bring internet to everyone. Second goal is to bridge the gap between policymakers and tech community. And third goal is to generate ideas for future of the internet. ISOC Bengaluru chapter is recently formed, and the volunteers are working really hard to conduct these events throughout this week. Please join me in welcoming our guest speaker today, Dr. Debayan Gupta, Assistant Professor of Computer Science at Ashola University. He has received his PhD from Yale University. He's also a visiting professor and research affiliate at MIT and MIT Sloan. Dr. Debayan's primary areas of interest include secure computation, cryptography, and privacy. He also has interest in number theory, complexity theory, robotics, and machine learning. He has helped start a number of companies in India and abroad, and as such, holds board positions in a number of startups. He also consults for and advises companies on cybersecurity, helping C-suite individuals understand and mitigate cyber risk. He has received multiple awards, including Excellence in Science from American Association for the Advancement of Science in 2015, Best Teaching Fellow Award, and Kempner Scholar Awards from Yale University in 2014. Over to Dr. Debayan to start the webinar.
Hi, pleasure to see everyone here. Let me just share my screen and we can get started. All right, fantastic. Now, just a couple of housekeeping things. If you have really big, major questions, feel free to stop me. If it's something minor, if it's something small, or I don't understand this, I don't understand that, just hold it till the end of the presentation. But if it's something where you think that, hey, this is completely wrong, I don't get what's going on at all, can you go back a slide, that sort of thing, feel free to stop me then and there, okay? And I will leave it to the discretion of each audience member to decide what's minor and what's major. I'll also try and keep a significant amount of time, maybe 20, 25 minutes at the end for questions, maybe more depending on how many questions come in the middle. And I really want to spend a little bit of time right at the beginning focusing on why I, as a pure computer science person, want to talk about legislation. Right? Because most of my work, I don't even need high performance computing. What I do is sort of math, basically, right? I do cryptography. And I want to really focus on why just coding stuff up or coming up with theory and all of that, that side of things really needs to meet the legal, the law enforcement, and the civil rights world in the middle when it comes to a lot of these things. And I'll try to sort of get that across. Some basic assumptions that I'm going to make while we're talking through this entire story. First of all, I'm not going to deal with sort of vague theoretical things. As far as possible, we're going to deal with very real world threat models. That means that, you know, someone may say, oh, Aadhaar fingerprints could get breached. The next question to ask is, if China gets a hold of 10 billion sets of fingerprints, what are they going to do with it? I have a gut feeling that this is somehow bad, that China or the US or whoever getting hold of all of my fingerprints is super bad. But why is it bad? How is it bad in a way that isn't already possible for these governments to do? So whenever we're talking about a bad thing happening, I really want to drill down on it and figure out why something is bad. Second, one of the easiest ways to keep something very, very safe is to just never share it with anyone. Just delete it. Don't even keep it. You just destroy it, delete it. There you go. Safe. We're not going to go down that road, which, by the way, is what many people do, especially in corporations. There are significant amounts of data that are simply deleted after a certain point in time. This is true for governments as well. And that data loss is something that we don't necessarily think is a good thing. And we can get into why a little bit later. And we'll see what are the ways in which we can keep information and still keep it safe. And what is the importance of privacy in that situation. The third point is that, especially towards the end, you'll see there's a lot of stuff that we can do, which is really counterintuitive, right? It just does not make sense in the conventional way in which we think about the world. I like to compare this to quantum mechanics, right? It feels like magic, but it works. It's sort of like that. There are things that we can do with cryptography nowadays which do not make sense for the conventional human to think about. And I'll give you a couple of examples at the end of this presentation. And fourth is it's really a point about kindness. All of us, me as well, we sort of shout at our politicians and be like, you made a bad law. And legislation is really, really, really hard. And I want to sort of put that sort of disclaimer and kindness first and make sure we understand that these are difficult times and these are difficult problems to solve. So everything I'm going to say today, hopefully I won't be providing any answers. I'll be raising a lot of questions, which I believe will help everyone here think more clearly about these topics. I already got introduced, so I'll just skip this slide. So I want to start with, as we all like to do when we're writing papers or whatever, with a little bit of motivation, which is, okay, we care about privacy and, for the usual reasons. I don't want anybody to know what I've been Googling or what diseases I have or whom I've been visiting or what kind of food I prefer. I don't want anyone to know that. So there's a feeling about that. But whenever we're talking about a danger, if you're talking about, let's say, privacy being breached, well, someone must be doing the breaching, right? There is an enemy or an adversary in the question. And the more powerful, the more dangerous the enemy, the stronger my defenses have to be, right? So whenever we talk about a right or something we have to protect, the natural next step in that question becomes, who are you protecting it from? So there I want to start with just a little bit of history so people can understand the scale of the game that we're playing, all right? So in the late 1980s, early 1990s, an American company, AT&T, along with a couple of other small contractors, they came up with this brilliant idea, which came to eventually be known as the mobile phone or the cell phone. And they made the first set of breakthroughs in the area, and they built the first cell phone. And the thing was a brick. I don't mean it in some metaphorical sense. I literally mean it was the weight and dimensions of an actual brick, right? And they were very excited about this. They showed it to everyone. The CIA and the NSA, as well as a couple of these other alphabet soup agencies, were very, very annoyed about this. They said, no, we've spent decades and billions making sure we're hooked into every telephone line across the world so that we can tap whoever we want whenever we want. You release this, this is not going to be okay, especially since, as it turns out, AT&T had put a certain kind of encryption, a protection on cell phones to prevent eavesdroppers from snooping. So this was called A51, A5/1 to be precise. And the idea was you didn't want some bozo with a radio to be able to listen in on two cell phones that were talking to each other. The NSA didn't like it. So what they did was they forced AT&T to get rid of A51. The NSA artificially built a fake encryption system called A52, right? And this is on like Wikipedia nowadays. This is very, very, very well known. They purpose-built a broken encryption system, and they forced AT&T to use it for all export purposes. Now, what happened is that it turns out that China ended up making most of the phones in the world. So for over a decade, the vast majority of phones in the world were using purposefully broken encryption called A52, simply because the United States espionage agencies decided they wanted to listen to everyone. This is beyond bulk surveillance. This is sort of subversion of trusted companies in order to enable random surveillance, to be honest. It's not like they were looking for a particular terrorist. This was just, let's get everyone. This, by the way, is the same reason why the US is angry with Huawei, saying you're doing spy stuff, blah, 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 mainly because it comes from, well, we're the only people allowed to do it, right? They've been doing it for a while, and the Chinese started doing it, the Indians have started doing it, everyone's doing it now, and there's a little bit of jealousy involved. So that's the scale of the game, where when we are talking about privacy and encryption and secrecy, we're not fighting against some random hacker who's sitting in someone's basement, right? The adversary in this story, the adversaries involved, these are nation states who have demonstrated, and I told you this one story, I could tell you 50, right? Who have demonstrated the willingness to go to extraordinary lengths in order to break encryption or get past our privacy guarantees, right? I'm not going to get into the ethics of the situation. It's just, this is the reality, right? Given this overall background, if we want to keep secrets, and we may want to keep secrets for all sorts of reasons. Let's say I'm a company, one of my scientists has been building stuff, and I want to keep that information secret, right? But on the other hand, let's say I want to patent it, I need to send that to a patent lawyer, right? So in these scenarios, there are essentially three mechanisms we have in order to ensure privacy or to keep secrets. Now, privacy and secrecy are two slightly different things, and we'll talk about that. I have a really nice cartoon at the end of the presentation talking about it. But in general, if we want to preserve these things, we have three methods. This is sort of not computer science, almost philosophy. The three methods that we have, the most common one is a legal method. You make someone sign a document, a non-disclosure agreement, they sign all sorts of things saying, if I leak the secret or if I break your privacy, if I'm a doctor and you tell me that you have a particular problem and then I go and tell a bunch of people that there are legal obligations that will kick in, right? There are legal repercussions or consequences that will occur. The problem with legal stuff, however, is that laws are retributive, not preventative, right? So a law against murder does not prevent murder. It just makes sure if you get caught for murder, you face harsh consequences. So the second method becomes much more popular among groups that cannot go to court. So if you're the military and you get hacked or your data is stolen, you'll be a laughingstock if you go to court and say, those bad people stole our data. So that doesn't work. So a lot of encryption technology and privacy preserving tech comes from the military, who practice the second kind of security, which is mathematical security. So then you can't just say that, legal security, I'll sign a document, it'll protect me. You make sure that mathematically, using encryption and advanced technology, you make sure that the data cannot be leaked. And the third method is just not sharing in the first place. That's also something that is widely used. Now, with this background that we want to share data, we have certain ways in which we're going to share it. I want to talk about us, sort of everyday citizens, and the companies that we deal with. So right now, India is launching or has launched. If you got a vaccine in India, you already have your Aadhaar number, right? Which is your healthcare ID number. Many people are super worried about things like Aadhaar or UPI storing their data or new age things that are going to come and AI and all of this stuff. And we have the DPDP, the current bill, which is there in India. The Europeans have a bunch of things going on, GDPR, DSA. The Americans have their own laws. There's laws all over the world. I want to focus your thought on a particular problem with all of these laws, which is the vast majority of the clauses in those laws depend on consent, right? Which is to say that you can have your data encrypted, you can have all of these protections, you can have all of these legal documents here and there, and you say that, okay, do you want to share your brain scans? Do you want us to share your brain scans with anyone who asks for it? Sign this document. And the assumption that the Indian government, for example, makes is that if you've signed that knowingly, it's legit. This object is legit. That is, however, not the case for many other fundamental rights. So the Indian government has ruled that privacy is a right. For many of our other rights, you can't sign it away, right? So even if I take a document that says Debayan is going to be, or you're going to be Debayan's slave from tomorrow, and you sign that document does not hold up. That has no value because it violates your rights, right? Your fundamental rights. Now, even though we say this about privacy, we allow individual citizens to give their privacy away with consent. The problem with consent is that it is meaningless. Our entire legal system, all of it is built on this, on basically two mechanisms, right? A rules-based approach and consent, okay? Whenever we talk about laws, it's a permission system. What does it mean? Oh, you get to turn left here, not over there. You're allowed to stand here, but not over there. This building can be 4 floors high, it can't be 5 floors high. So there are rules or axioms or whatever you want to call them. So there's a big thick book which is theoretically keeping on getting updated with laws that are all in sort of sync with each other. And as long as you obey those laws, you're fine. So there's a set of rules. So it's a rules or permissions-based approach combined with this idea of consent, that there are things that you can sign away, right? Here's the problem with consent. I'll get into the rules-based approach in just a moment, but I want to focus on consent for now. Especially in cases where the data involved is really, really, really important, such as medical data, right? Consent is meaningless. If someone's at the hospital and their mother's in the ICU and the doctor comes and they say, sign this document, you're going to sign the document. You're not going to give it a second thought. You're just going to sign, right? This is true for 99.99% of our citizens, right? It's also true even when the pressure is not that high. We sign all sorts of things. How many times have we actually read those stupid terms and conditions or end user license agreements before just clicking agree, agree, next, next? Because we don't have time for this nonsense. But I want to argue more than just sort of human behavioral reasons. There are bigger reasons, clear, strong, mathematical reasons why consent is meaningless in today's world. And those two reasons are in type and in scale. So that's bullet point number 2 and 3 on the screen. I'll go through both of the reasons why consent is meaningless. When you're consenting, what are you consenting to? You're saying that, let's say when it comes to data privacy, right? You're saying that there is a particular piece of data, and I agree to share this thing with you. That's what that is what you're agreeing to, right? That I, Debayan, am agreeing to take this piece of data and I'm giving it to you. That's the agreement that is made. This is Sundar Pichai of Google. And they've been working on some pretty nice work on diabetic retinopathy, right? So diabetics can go blind due to some blood vessel related stuff in the eyes. And they were doing some pretty interesting work in that area. And this is his presentation on it. What they realized is that just by looking at your eyes, they could tell all sorts of things about you. This is just from your eyes. So not only could they talk about your age, they could predict your body mass index. They could tell you how fat you were, essentially, just by looking at your eyes, right? We've now, with today's all of this hype about artificial intelligence and stuff, we've gotten used to this kind of story that, oh, there's that apocryphal thing that Target was able to tell that a woman was pregnant before she told anyone, that sort of thing. The problem is, when someone gave away a photo of their eye, they didn't think that that meant that they were also giving away data about their smoking condition, whether they smoked or not. They thought, I'm just giving a photo of my eye. Similarly, that woman, when she was shopping at Target, she's thinking, Target will know what I buy, but I don't want to give away the fact that I'm pregnant. So when you're giving away your data, especially with fast-moving advances in artificial intelligence, you don't know what you're giving away because you think you're giving away photos of eyes, you're giving away a bunch of other things simultaneously. The worst part is there isn't any database that tells you that, oh, you give away your eye, you're giving away your body mass index, whether you smoke or not, your gender, this, that, 15 other things, because we don't know. Because 2 years later, maybe someone discovers that from a photo of your eye, I can figure out whether you have stomach illnesses or something, right? So when you are giving away X, you don't know what is that Y that is attached to that X you are giving away simultaneously. So how can you possibly consent to giving away X when you don't even know what you're giving away? And there's no possible way for you to know what you're giving away, right? So we think that DigiYatra, for example, is taking our facial scans. But tomorrow, if it turns out from your facial scans, they can tell whether you smoke or not, whether you're vegetarian or you're non-vegetarian. Oh, is that surprising? Maybe it is, maybe it isn't, right? Whether you smoke, whether you drink, all of these things, who knows? Maybe you can tell from photos of eyes and faces and things like that, right? And maybe you don't want that data out there. The problem is right now we have no way to know whether we're actually giving away that data or not because we just don't know, right? So that's the first reason. The second is a problem of scale. And this is in many ways even harder to deal with. So let's go back to the previous thing and say, what was my problem with the I thing? It is that you think you're giving away X when in reality you're giving away Y, which may be stuff that you want to keep secret. So I want to talk about a very specific example of such a scenario now. These cameras, you must have seen them all over by now. Especially if you live in a big city, these are called automatic license plate readers, or ALPRs. Some places call them automatic number plate readers, or ANPRs. It's the same thing. The idea is that when you drive past, let's say, I hope you don't, but if you happen to drive through a red light or something, there's a tiny camera that is looking down at you. And what it does is it'll take a picture of your car. It'll isolate and do optical character recognition on your number plate. And then you get a bill 2-3 weeks later in the mail saying, look, you did this bad thing, here's your fine, that sort of situation. Now, legally and technically speaking, this is perfectly fine because here's what this camera is doing. It is automating the police person who would be standing next to the road And if you drove your car past, they would write down your car's number and you'd get a ticket. You'd get the same thing. So what this is doing, it's saying this is better than the policeman, right? Because it is taking a photo. So it's not like the police person wrote down the wrong number or something of the sort, right? So it's taking a photo. And let's say for now that this camera is not somehow nefariously controlled by some shadowy organization or anything of the sort, right? It's not like the camera is sort of slyly looking in a different direction when it's not needed. It's not doing any of that. Let's say this is a legitimate camera that does what it's told to, right? And it's all the code is good, everything's open source, everything's nice. Legally, you're on the road, you have no expectation of privacy, right? So there's no preventing this camera, legally speaking, from taking photos of your car, let's say. And pretty much everyone initially agreed that this was a good idea. There's nothing wrong with it. Ethically, legally, this is completely fine. It's just a traffic camera. Who cares? Well, what happens if you don't have one camera, but you have 1 lakh cameras, like you have in many cities, right? So in the Delhi area where I teach, there are a huge number of cameras. We don't know exactly how many. We suspect it's in the lakhs. Many of them, there are companies that do this. The Delhi area one, there's a good company called Critical, which does fantastic work in this area, building these cameras. Here's the problem. If I asked most of you whether it was okay for the police to put a GPS tracker on your car without a warrant, you'd say, no. The police are not allowed to put a GPS tracker on my car. They need a warrant to do that, right? Most people feel that way. But presumably, most of you also agreed to the camera example just before that it's okay to have a camera on the road. The problem is, once you have, instead of 1 camera, you scale it up to 1 lakh cameras, I can track your car wherever it goes. And there's software available with the police and with many other agencies. And remember, this is public data to them, right? So this data doesn't require them to sign any documents, get a warrant, authorization, oversight, nothing. They just have this data. And they have software that can track your car wherever it goes. It's as good, if not better, than a GPS tracking system. And the moment you have this ability, so here, again, you have the same problem as in the I case, right? You give them the ability to do X, which is take a photo of my car, but it ends up giving them the ability to do Y, which is tracing your car GPS level accuracy wherever it goes effectively, right? So in both of these cases, you think you're giving permission for something, you're actually giving permission for something else. The second case is very dangerous because the scale of it changes not just the size of the problem, it changes the very nature of the problem. Specifically speaking, this tech is, this stuff has already been used, right? Like for the last decade. Barack Obama was using it to trace, more than the last decade then. Obama was using it to check who went to Republican rallies. Trump was found checking who was going to opponents' rallies of his own. There have been court cases in Germany and England about this. There was an interesting study in Minnesota, Missouri, one of those states. I'll attach the link later on. They went around checking what these database searches actually were, right? That the police were searching, and what they found was something like 60% of the searches were policemen looking up where their ex-wives or girlfriends were, right? And that's the problem. Once you have something like this that allows you an ability that you should not have, tracking someone wherever they are, you're probably going to use it for fairly bad reasons. There was a New York police officer who was caught. At the time, they were blackmailing a person who had a non-standard sexual orientation. So this guy was gay, and he was going to a gay bar in a certain area in New York. And this police officer had traced where his car would stop. And then they were blackmailing that guy, saying that I'll tell your family and so on and so forth. And what I want to emphasize is this is not an isolated, this is, you know, 1 out of a million, maybe not a million, a few thousand stories. This is happening all the time, all over. Because people are giving consent for something. It is being, that piece of data, either due to machine learning or due to scale, is getting changed into something else. It's giving the people with the data a new ability, which I would have, or you would have never given away in the first place. You would never have given someone the ability to track you. You would never have given someone the ability to know whether you smoked or not, or whatever, without sort of, unless it was your doctor or something. But now once they have the data, you can't take it back. That's the fun bit about data, right? It's an interesting kind of resource. Some people, they say things like data is the new oil. It's not the new oil. See, if you have oil and you give me the oil, you don't have the oil anymore, right? It's gone. But with data, you can make copies of it. We can all have the data, and we can have more and more and more. It never goes away. As such, I want to try and convince you that consent is a mechanism that no longer applies. It is no longer useful as a way of knowing whether something is legitimate or ethically correct. It may work for property documents and so on and so forth, but when we're talking about data privacy and encryption and related technologies, consent is, for the vast majority of, let's say, Indian citizens, it is no longer a sufficiently strong measure. Okay, so I've raised a problem. What's the solution? How do you fix this? I mean, we still do need to share data. I need to give my doctor information. I need to give my tax attorney information. Companies need to exchange information. We want to send each other emails. What do we do? I've written down a couple of 5, I guess, separate constructions, ranging from anonymization to something called differential privacy. There are all sorts of ways that people have thought up to try and fix this problem. Most of them don't work. All right. This PAC privacy stuff is pretty new. It's less than a year old. That's by Srini Devdas out of MIT. It's got some pretty interesting ideas. But for Indian data sets, I think what we need to do, this is my personal opinion, this is not a well thought out thing, just a gut feeling. We probably need to go for purpose limitation. So I don't think we have the data cleanliness required that we can say that, okay, we'll impose these mathematical guarantees, we'll make sure every, the Americans will say, okay, this stuff, it has to be locked behind AES or whatever. With Indian data sets, a lot of data sets are dealt with very, very, very badly. Concrete example, I was working with AIMS Delhi on something not too long ago, and along with some other folks. And these other folks, whom I'm not going to name, they had a lot of fairly sensitive healthcare data. And I was doing some machine learning on it. So I said, hey, can I, at least at the time they were proposing the project to me. So I said, I don't know if I'll be able to help, but can you tell me what the data looks like? Like, what are the columns? Can you give me some statistical sort of data about it? What is the variance we're looking at? How many subclasses are there? What is the size of your data set? This, that, and the other. And the guy just emailed me a zip file, like literally, like took a giant CSV, zipped it, sent me all of the data. And so I'm sitting here with, I don't know how many lakh people's private healthcare records. And so I deleted it, thank God. But, having high and mighty legal definitions and mathematical definitions is one thing. But the fact of the matter is that at the ground level, people are just dealing with data willy-nilly. That the actual security controls at the ground are really bad. So my guess is what we really need to go for is a combination of education and this last point, which is purpose limitation, which is we need to do a lot of sort of strong legal pushes saying that you're not allowed to do this stuff. If you're given data for a particular reason, do not give it away for any other reason, that sort of thing. So we need to have a huge awareness push towards purpose limitation. A lot of the more advanced techniques, they are important. They can and should be used, but we got to do the purpose limitation stuff first. That's my gut feeling. I want to quickly summarize before I end sort of the 3 types of ways that we have of maintaining privacy beyond not sharing, which I've hidden away now. One is legal structures, as I discussed. The second is encryption technologies. And these can be incredibly counterintuitive, right? I'll come back to both of those in a moment. The third is alternative structures. So many of you may be familiar with federated learning. So you can have different ways of dealing with data, which vastly reduce the probability of any kind of leakage occurring. So there are structural mechanisms you can put in place. But I want to go back to that second point. I've said encryption, and I've written 2 sort of acronyms there that seem a little bit suspect. They're not AES or public key crypto or anything of the sort. I've written FHE, which stands for fully homomorphic encryption, and MPC, which stands for multi-party computation. These names are not particularly revealing. But I want to say that these are technologies that might very well give us what we need. I'll only talk about it in a vague sense, but I want to push the counterintuitive nature of these new age cryptographic technologies. Consider the following scenario. Imagine that all of us in this call, we want to calculate our average salary. And salaries are private information. None of us wants to give away our salary, right? That's a pretty standard situation, that I don't want to publish my salary online, or I don't want to tell anyone my salary, actually. Forget publishing it online. I won't even tell you. On the other hand, all of us, let's say if we work for the same company, we're quite interested in knowing what is the average salary at our company. Am I getting below average salaries? So how do you, or above average salaries for that matter? So how do you do this when you don't trust other people? Everyone's honest, but you just don't want to, you trust everyone in the room to be honest. They're normal people, but you don't want to leak your salary information to anyone except yourself. So here's one way you could do it. You take a calculator, you add your salary, you add a random number, right? You give it to the next person, they add their salary, they add a random number. Goes around the room. Second time around, you get the calculator, you just subtract off whatever the random number that you added was. So you remember you added your salary and you added a random number, you passed it on. Second time, you just remove that same random number. So after 2 rounds around the room, your calculator has the sum of everyone's salaries, you can divide and you can get the average. So it's a pretty trivial technique as it goes. Now, it turns out that if you can do this for addition and for multiplication, you can calculate any arbitrary function. And we've managed to do that for quite a few decades now. It's only in the last decade that it's become fast enough for everyday use. But we can now do this for an arbitrary function. And this is insane. Let me give you an example of what that means. It means that suppose you want to go from point A to point B, and you want Google to tell you what is the best sort of least traffic path to get from A to B, right? But you don't want to tell Google what A and B are. You don't want to say where your starting point is and where your stopping point is. But you still want Google to tell you how to get from A to B. This sounds completely stupid, right? How can Google tell you how to get from A to B if you won't tell Google what A and B are in the first place? And Google's not going to send you all their traffic data so you can run it yourself, right? That's absurd also. So Google's not willing to give away their mapping and traffic data, and you're not willing to give away your A and B starting and ending points. But that's exactly what we can do with this kind of technology. And it's not we can do, we have done it. This is already many world leaders actually use this kind of tech to do transportation, to figure out best routes and things like that. Because if there's a spy, let's say at Google Maps, who's checking that, oh, I know this person is in the president's retinue or the prime minister's retinue, and they're constantly checking how much time this route is going to take. That's not information that should be out there anywhere. And you need up-to-date traffic data, right? So you can't just use a pre-held map or something. But you remember the addition thing? Everyone had private data, and we computed on it without revealing any individual salary. And so this is exactly the same situation. My secret happens to be A and B. Google's secret happens to be their mapping data. And together we can compute a function on both without revealing anything else. Just think about how completely stupid and counterintuitive that is. Google is able to tell you how to get from A to B without you revealing what A and B are. Right? This is very much on the level of sort of quantum mechanics style stuff. This is just, it does not make sense to the human brain normally. The math just makes it happen. All right? Just take my word on that. I want to end with two sort of screenshot sort of things. First is, I was talking about nation state adversaries, who are we hiding data from? It's not just nation states. Your data is worth real money right now. Okay? Hackers and various other nefarious groups who don't need to hack, they would just pay someone off at your medical company or someone else to get this data. They will pay serious amounts of cash for it. And they're not paying cash for fun. They're presumably going to use these things to break into your bank accounts or use your insurance for certain purposes and things of that variety, right? Medical data especially is incredibly useful. Because if I have your medical data, especially your insurance data, I can charge things to your insurance in many cases and get the money and run away. And these are large cash amounts. And so these are fairly in-demand objects. And I want to end with this little cartoon about privacy versus security. You need to have both, all right? You can't just decide that we're going to just be incredibly secure but not have privacy. These are not the same thing. And it is important that we pay attention to both whenever we're talking about encryption. So I'll just stop here and take questions if there are any.
If there are any questions, you can post it either on the chat or unmute yourself and ask. Sarang raised hand. Sarang, you can go ahead. Sarang?
You're unmuted, but we can't hear you, Sarang.
While we wait for him, I had one question actually. So you talked about adversaries are the nations they themselves, right? So there is a concept of this lawful intercept, isn't it? Which there's technically it is built into the product itself, isn't it? For the government to, whenever they want, they can get the data, whatever they want, right? So with that in place, why do you think they still go out of way to gather more or snoop more actually, right? So I just
So
curious.
remember, laws are limited to countries, right? So it's not that the Indian government, it's all of the governments want to spy on everybody. So here's the problem. Here's a very basic problem with this law. The one you're talking about is LIM, Lawful Intercept and Monitoring in India. Bulk surveillance does not work. It's a terrible taxpayer idea. And here's the best evidence I can give you for this, right? I'm not afraid of some super competent James Bond or super competent hi-fi organization who's spying on us, and maybe they sometimes do bad things. That's not what I'm afraid of. Okay, I'm afraid that the people who are spying are idiots. Okay, and these are people. You know, they have this thing, one rotten apple, but they don't finish the saying. You know, rotten apple spoils the barrel. So in any organization, you'll have 1 or 2% of people who have bad moral character. Let's put it that way. In any organization. And when you have structures that are highly secret with very little oversight, that 1-2% of people can do outsized damage.
Got it.
In the case of bulk surveillance, here's what we've seen. I'll give you some direct, interesting stuff. So this happened almost exactly 10 years ago, actually. So you remember that everyone knows this, I suppose, that after 9/11, the 2001 attacks in the US, the United States suddenly sort of woke up. They put a huge amount of money into their armed forces and into their intelligence system. And they said, look, just keep track of everybody. I don't care. Just find out what's going on. And they spent tens of billions of dollars on it, right? More than that. So India's budget, central government, state governments, all combined per year, right, is about $400 billion. It's actually 350 plus we put in another 60, 70. We call that the fiscal deficit, whatever. 400 odd billion, right? Something 20 something lakh crore, that sort of level. That's Indian government's budget. The Pentagon's budget is roughly 800 billion per year. Okay. So I want you to think about the amount of money being put into it. Now, in this situation, for many years, this had been going on. And in 2015, especially after the Snowden affair and all of that stuff, the US government itself, their Senate Intelligence Committee, a bunch of other folks, they came in and they asked their own spy people, what have you done with all this money? Right? You've taken tens of billions of dollars of taxpayer money. That's the cost. What is the benefit? What have you done? So they initially said we've solved N cases, N 9/11s. I think they said 74 or 54 or some such number. Then the number started going down. Then it became 12, then 5. And then finally speaking, there was one case they were able to point to that bulk surveillance had helped. This entire huge infrastructure that they have built with tens of billions of dollars of money, they were able to point to one case where it had helped them secure a conviction. That one case was that of a Somali taxi driver in California who tried to send $8,500 to his cousin or brother or someone, and they stopped that money transfer. $8,500. Okay? And in case you think I'm joking, this is a full ProPublica investigation on it. Right? I really want you to understand these are not sort of James Bond characters. These are Pink Panther type. Right? Like they have too much power and too much data and they don't know what to do with it. All the clever people, just to be clear, there's 90% of the people in the organization are clever. That's not the problem. The problem is that the remaining 2%, 10% who are using this data for stupid stuff. Right? And because we are using this word national security, it's very hard to argue against it. Because I also want national security. So we keep giving more and more data to these people, and I want my answer. Maine paisa diya hai. I have given you money. What have you given me in return? And unfortunately, in India, unless you suddenly believe that Indian legal structures and Indian systems are more competent than the US ones, and I'm being slightly sarcastic here, the situation is not any better. We are also doing the same sort of thing. We're spending money spying on ourselves for all the wrong reasons. Our police, our law enforcement agencies deserve better. There are better ways to do this, and we're not doing that.
Gotcha. So there's one question in the chat. How can legislation be flexible enough to adapt to emerging technology? Would you consider the DPA to be a good example of a technology? Oh, sorry.
Sure. So I saw that.
You saw that, right?
Yeah. So if I had an answer to that question, I'd have said it. Very honestly, I don't. The best answer I have is to be able to write down our fundamental ideas around privacy and security and have rights and purpose limitations around them. Otherwise, you're going to perpetually get caught in this catch-up game where, yesterday it was blockchain, cryptocurrencies. Today it is your chat GPT. Tomorrow it will be something else. Every day there'll be a new technology and you'll be writing regulation after that, after it's come out, right? So you're perpetually going to be playing catch up. And the only way around it that I can think of is having sort of rights-based, non-permission style, like actual purpose-limited systems. But even then, it's incredibly hard. It's incredibly, incredibly hard.
The purpose limited systems again goes back to policies, isn't it? When you say purpose limited, again, policy should enforce this, isn't it? Is that what you're referring to when you say purpose limited?
Yes. So purpose limitation can be legal or mathematical. So for example, we have ways of making sure that we release data in such a way that you can use it only for ABC purposes and nothing else.
Okay.
And again, like I said, this is very counterintuitive. If you give me the data, why can't I use it to make a party hat? Like I can do whatever I want. No, it turns out we can give you something in such a way that you can only run certain kinds of queries on it and nothing outside of that. Right? So there are many, many interesting new technologies that have come up in this space. And governments are already using it. And as usual, I'm sure many of you can guess which is the government that's using it the most: Estonia, right? Because, technology adoption-wise, they tend to be among the first in the world. They're already using this stuff to report all sorts of, average government salaries using exactly the mechanism I mentioned, but all the way up to do their tendering and auction system. There's 50 other things that they've already started using this for. There's a very good company, what's the name? Cybernetica, who has a product called ShareMind that produces this for them. It's a good researcher, Dan Bogdanov and team. They've been building this for Estonia for quite a while, and they have some fairly good techniques. So yeah, governments around the world are starting to use this stuff. Right now, it's mainly in Europe and also Northern European countries who are starting to use this. Secret sharing, fully homomorphic encryption. The US is seeing an increase in those kinds of companies as well. But I want to emphasize still much of the use is military. Civilian use cases are fewer in number. India also is starting to see a few startups in this space. There's a linkage between the firms that do this and the ones that got into, cryptocurrencies and so on, but they saw, this is too volatile. So, zero knowledge proofs, that sort of thing. And then they get into this stuff. There's a fair number of companies in India as well, which are starting to get into this space.
All right. Thanks. So there is another question. Can you provide any information about vulnerable apps that people aren't aware of? And though we are using service providers to reach any service which offered by an app company, how do service providers comply with the data privacy?
They usually don't, is the answer, the service providers. They try to, but unfortunately, they usually don't. The reason is very simple. Most service providers, if I'm your internet service provider or I'm doing something else, I'm probably using libraries and I'm outsourcing to all sorts of third parties, all sorts of different subparts. And nowadays, I realistically speaking have no control over what they're doing. right? So there is significant leakage of private information that is happening. And in terms of vulnerable apps that people aren't aware of, I don't know what to say about that one. Very honestly, look, the vast majority of applications that we deal with, they are not well coded up. I will have to say this. The reason behind it is not the fault of the developers that they're not doing it properly. It is because we don't have good standard operating procedures for security in many places. I actually have a company that works on this stuff, which is why I know the sort of gut level details of what's going on inside many companies. But there's a fun little paper, you can read it. It's called The Most Dangerous Code in the World by Vitaly Shmatikov and co. So Vitaly Shmatikov is this researcher from the US. I think he used to be at U Texas Austin. Now he might be at Princeton or something. I don't remember where. But he and his students, they did a study in the most dangerous code in the world. They looked at apps that were out there, and they looked at important apps, Amazon's payment management system for merchants, Chase Bank, right? So Chase Bank is not your run-of-the-mill, roadside merchant sort of. These are big companies with huge security divisions. And they found that the vast majority of these apps, in fact, all of the ones they investigated, had security that was not just bad, but almost non-existent. Just think about this. Chase Bank, security non-existent. So why? Not because, they also had OTP going on, they had all of that stuff. But it turns out that underneath, when they were running their actual sort of cryptographic protocols, the code was so badly written that you could hack into it with trivial ease. In the particular case of Amazon's merchant management system, they were sending null pointers, null values back and forth instead of actual certificates. And you can imagine why. There are coders who are under a lot of pressure, and somebody says, the program manager says, you have to get this done by tomorrow. And this poor coder is saying, okay, this value, this is this. Okay, if I set this to null, it works. Okay, let me not touch it. Send it to production. Chalo, send kar do. And they set it to null, and it worked, and everything was fine, except it wasn't fine. And we are seeing this over and over and over again because security is almost always an afterthought. It's almost something that's added on later. And you're losing money when you do this, right? So a lot of security code is incredibly badly written. That's the problem. So my guess is almost all of these apps are vulnerable, okay? It's not that people are aware of. The question is, have the hackers put in enough time to figure out the vulnerabilities? That's what's protecting you.
One last question, probably. Any suggestive way of purpose gating example of technologies?
I wish I could give you good examples. I really don't have any, right? What we are starting to see this purpose gating stuff is in something called functional encryption. You can look this up. So functional encryption, if you take X and you encrypt it, it's inside a locked box, and then you decrypt it, you get back X, right? So what functional encryption does, you encrypt X, but when you get it out, when you decrypt, it becomes f of X. It's no longer the thing that you encrypted, it's a function of that. That class of technologies, functional encryption, attribute-based encryption, there's a bunch of these technologies in place that allow you to limit what the other end can do with your data. And there's some fairly powerful techniques in there, but again, only military use right now. It is not in civilian use, as far as I'm aware. Anything else? I think we're past 5 o'clock.
Yeah, I think we're the top of the hour. So that's about it. I don't think we have any more questions.
Let me take the last.
If people do have questions, I'm happy to, if someone can collate and email them to me, I'm happy to take it later on. And since I did mention, I don't like saying things without citing, which is why I sent the article on bulk surveillance as well. And I realized I mentioned certain things about the Pentagon's budget and how they were very stupid. And especially on recorded calls, I want to make sure I cite everything I say. I strongly recommend this old Reuters Investigates article. you know how companies are required to say, I have balanced my budget, you know, double entry bookkeeping, left-hand column, right-hand column. The Pentagon hasn't filed a successful one in decades. They can't add. It doesn't add up. Left-hand side, right-hand side. So we don't, forget, we don't know what they're doing. They themselves don't know what they're doing with the money. All right. They're still using COBOL.
Really?
So again, so if this is the US, imagine what is happening in India. So this is what I want to say. Like, don't think these are national security, complicated people doing complicated. No. These are, there's a lot of jugaad, there's a lot of nonsensical stuff going on. And we need to make sure that we have sufficient oversight over the stuff to sort of point out the nonsense when we see it. That's all. It's not that these are bad people. These are good people. They're dedicating their lives to the nation, for God's sake. These are people trying to do good things. But let's make sure that they're able to do so.
So I think that's about it. So I sincerely want to thank Dr. Debayan for taking the time to join us and sharing his thoughts. On behalf of Internet Society Bengaluru chapter and everyone, thank you so much, sir. We'll call it a meeting, I guess. Thank you so much. Bye.